The first time I heard the word treason attached to my name, it did not come from an enemy or a stranger or someone who hated the uniform I wore. It came from my father sitting 3 feet away from me at a gray metal table, smiling, like he had finally found the lever that would put me back where he believed I belonged. The room was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Fluorescent lights buzzed above us, harsh and white. A red sign on the wall read, "No phones." The air smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. Plastic chairs scraped softly against the floor every time someone shifted. I remember thinking absurdly that this room looked exactly like every administrative space I had ever learned to fear, because nothing good ever started here. My father cleared his throat, folded his hands, and spoke with the calm confidence of a man who had rehearsed this moment. "I am reporting my daughter for treason," he said. "She has been compromising classified work." The word daughter landed harder. Then treason. It was deliberate. He wanted them to hear that first. I did not react. I did not gasp or protest. I sat perfectly still, hands flat on my thighs, nails pressing into the fabric of my uniform until I could feel the seams digging into my skin. The officer across from us, CMDR Klein, did not look at me right away. He looked at my father instead, like he was listening to someone important, someone respectable, someone patriotic. I had seen that look before. My father had worn it like armor my entire life. "You think that uniform makes you untouchable." My father continued, his voice smooth, almost gentle. "It does not. You are not an operator. You are a liability. I raised you. I know what you are, unstable and secretive." Each sentence was precise, measured, sharpened by years of knowing exactly where to cut. He did not shout. He did not need to. He knew the power of saying these things calmly in a room where silence meant authority. CMDR Klein finally turned his attention to me. His expression was neutral, professional, empty of anything human. "Petty Officer Harper," he said, "you are directed to surrender your CAC and remain in a controlled status pending review." The words were procedural, but the effect was surgical. I reached into my pocket and placed my card on the table. The small piece of plastic made a soft sound when it hit the metal surface. That sound echoed in my head, louder than my father's voice, louder than the lights, louder than my own heartbeat. For a brief moment, my vision blurred, not from tears, but from something colder. A memory flickered through my mind uninvited. My childhood kitchen, the sound of cabinet doors slamming, my father's hand tight around my wrist, not leaving marks, not needing to. The lesson was always the same. Control did not require noise. Control required certainty. I stared at my CAC as if it were a door that had just been slammed shut on the rest of my life. Around us, the imbalance was obvious. My father was treated like a concerned parent, a former serviceman doing his duty. I was treated like a potential threat, like a problem that needed to be contained. No one asked me to speak. No one asked for context. No one asked how a support role could possibly access what he claimed I had compromised. The system had already chosen which story felt safer. If you have ever been punished for staying silent, drop where you are watching from. I need to know I am not the only one. CMDR Klein gathered the paperwork without meeting my eyes. My father leaned back in his chair, satisfied. For a split second, his gaze flicked toward me, and in it, I saw something I recognized. Well, triumph mixed with relief. This was not about the Navy or security or integrity. This was about winning. I was escorted into the hallway to stand by, no phone, no badge, no explanation. The corridor stretched long and narrow, its walls lined with closed doors that suddenly felt hostile, like they were watching me. I stood there, hands clasped behind my back, posture perfect, because even stripped of everything else, discipline was still mine. Footsteps echoed somewhere distant. My father passed by me slowly. He did not look at the escort or the officers. He leaned in just enough that only I could hear him. "I can still control you," he said. Then he walked away. The words settled in my chest, heavy and familiar. I stared straight ahead, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction I told myself to breathe, to count, to stay present, because somewhere beneath the shock, beneath the humiliation, beneath the old pain, something else had begun to stir. A quiet awareness, a question. Why now? Why like this? I had not spoken about my work. I had not broken protocol. I had not done anything careless. And yet, he had been confident enough to use a word that could end everything I knew then, that this had not been impulsive. This had been prepared. The door at the end of the hallway opened. A man in plain clothes stepped out. He did not rush. He did not announce himself. He looked at me once, then said 6 words in a low, even voice. "Mom, do not move, escort inbound." The hallway fell silent around us, and for the first time since my father spoke, I felt the ground shift under my feet. Not fear, not relief, something sharper, the unmistakable sense that the story I had been forced into was about to change. The hallway stayed too bright and too quiet after that man spoke. "Mom, do not move, escort inbound." I did not know who he was, and I did not know why he used that tone, the kind that makes a room obey without raising volume. I only knew my father had just walked away with the confidence of a man who believed the system would finish what he started, and in the sterile silence of that corridor, the truth I had avoided for years rose up like a bruise pressed too hard. This was not new. This was not sudden. This was not about treason or patriotism or protecting the Navy. This was the oldest story in my life wearing a new uniform. My father had been building chains long before I ever wore mine. I remember the first time he taught me the word permission, like it was a family law, not a courtesy. It was 2010. I was a teenager standing by the front door with my backpack on one shoulder because a friend had invited me to a birthday dinner. My mother was in the kitchen pretending to stir something on the stove, the way she did when she wanted to disappear without leaving the room. My father sat in his recliner in a faded navy shirt, feet planted like an anchor, and he did not look up from the television until I reached for the doorknob. "Where do you think you are going?" he asked. I told him, and I watched his mouth tighten the smallest movement that meant no. "You did not request permission," he said. Like I was a junior sailor who forgot a protocol, it was a dinner. I said quietly. "The air in the room changed consequences," he replied, and he pointed at the clock on the wall as if time itself belonged to him. "You will sit right there until you learn chain of command." I stood still because I had learned early that arguing did not change outcomes. It only added punishment. My friend texted me twice, then stopped. The next day at school, someone asked why I did not show, and I lied, because it was easier than explaining that my house ran on rules that did not make sense outside its walls. In 2012, it was the phone. He started calling me after school not once, but again and again, until I answered, even if I was in the middle of the hallway with people watching Harper. He would say, using my last name like a drill instructor, "Where are you and who are you with?" If I hesitated, I could hear the smile he kept for control, not warmth. Do not make me repeat myself. If I missed a call, he would leave a voicemail that sounded like concern to anyone else and like a threat to me. "I will cut your phone off if you ignore me. I will come get you and embarrass you in front of everyone if you force me to." He loved that phrase, "if you force me to," because it turned his choices into my fault. My mother would whisper later, "Just answer him, honey, it is easier." And I would, because I wanted peace, not because I agreed. In 2014, at a holiday dinner with relatives, he showed me what humiliation looked like when it was served as family entertainment. An aunt asked me what I wanted to do after graduation, and before I could speak, my father answered for me. "She wants to play tough," he said. "She wants to go off and prove something like she is special." He chuckled, and everyone laughed because he framed it like a joke. Then he looked straight at me, and his voice dropped just enough for the message to land. "You are nothing without my name." The room did not go silent. because people did not know what to do with that sentence. They laughed again, softer this time, like they were buying safety by agreeing. My cheeks burned, but I kept my face blank because he punished emotion too. Tears were weakness, anger was disrespect. Silence was the only thing he could not directly outlaw, so I used it like a shield. In 2016, I watched him do it with paperwork instead of words. I needed my birth certificate for a school form and my passport for a program trip. He kept them in a locked drawer with other documents, and he made me stand beside him while he opened it slowly like he was granting a favor. "You do not touch what you have not earned," he said. He handed me the papers one at a time, like contraband, and when I asked if I could keep them for the week, he smiled. "No," he said. "You will bring them back today and do not test me because I know consequences." That was the year I learned something else. If he controlled paper, he controlled movement. If he controlled movement, he controlled my world. So I started building my own small, quiet resistance. I kept copies of forms. I wrote down dates. I saved voicemails. I did not know the term then, but I knew the method. Document "Do not argue" when I joined the Navy in 2018. People thought I was running towards something noble, and I was. But I was also running away from him. I thought distance and regulations would create a boundary. He could not cross. For a while, it worked. I moved to Virginia and I learned the language of real chain of command, the kind that protects people when it is used correctly. I learned how to keep my posture calm and my voice level. Even when my stomach was tight, I learned to live on schedules that were not built to trap me. And I learned quickly that the best way to survive any system was to understand it better than the person trying to weaponize it. But my father did not let go. He adapted. He started using his identity as a retired serviceman, like a pass that opened doors he should not have access to. He would call and say, "I know people. Harper, I will make one call and you will find yourself back where you belong." He said it like a promise, not a threat, because he wanted me to believe he had reach everywhere. I began to hear his old rules sliding into new spaces when he asked about my job. "What exactly do you do?" He would press, and I would answer the same way every time: support role, operation support. It was true, and it was the only safe version of truth I could give. People hear support, and they imagine paperwork and coffee runs and harmless meetings. They imagine someone replaceable. My father heard support, and he heard weakness. He believed it confirmed what he always wanted to believe, that I did not matter without him. He would scoff on the phone and say, "So you are not really in it? Then you are just support." He said just support, like it was a stain, and I let him think it, because silence was still my shield. If he did not understand my work, he could not twist it or claim it or compete with it. At least that is what I told myself. Now, in that hallway with my CAC gone and my name branded with treason, I finally saw the pattern like a map laid flat. He had always used the same tools: permission, consequences, chain of command, and when those stopped working, he used reputation and systems and his favorite threat. I know people. He had not reported me on a whim. He had prepared for this the way he prepared everything that mattered to him. Slowly, quietly, with certainty. The words he whispered in my ear moments ago matched the words he had used when I was 16, standing by that locked drawer. "I can still control you." I swallowed and kept my face still while inside something cracked open into clarity. He did not just report me today. He had been building this for weeks, maybe longer, and I could feel the next move coming before it arrived. Jaglautier Maya Chen gave me 10 minutes. Not because she was generous, but because that was all the system allowed her to offer someone already marked as a problem. Her office was small and clean, with a flag in the corner and a single-frame citation on the wall. She did not ask how I was doing or tell me to sit. She looked at the clock, then at me and said, "You have 10 minutes." Harper used them wisely. I nodded once and stayed standing, because I knew better than to waste time on posture or tone. This was not a place for emotion. This was a place for precision. I spoke slowly and clearly, and I chose each word like it would be copied into a record allegation summary. I said first. Her pen paused. She glanced up and then down again. You want a summary of the accusation? Yes, I replied, exact language if possible. She exhaled quietly and began to read from a file. Allegations of unauthorized disclosure and improper handling of classified information related to operation support activities, she said. It was vague on purpose. I felt the familiar pull of anger and pushed it down. Time window, I said next. She hesitated again. Late summer through early fall, she answered. Dates are still under review. Reporting source, I said last. And this time I did not soften my voice. She looked up fully now. Right now the system believes the report, she said carefully. That is all I can tell you at this stage. The sentence landed exactly as it was meant to. Not as an apology. Not as reassurance. It was a warning. I did not argue. I did not ask why or how, I only nodded once. Thank you for your time, I said and turned toward the door. Harper Chen added quietly, this process is not fast, and it is not kind. I stopped with my hand on the handle. I understand, I said, because I did, and because understanding was the only advantage I had left. Outside the building, the air felt heavier, like the world had added weight without permission. I drove back to my apartment in Virginia Beach in silence, windows down, radio off, letting the ocean air sting my face just enough to keep me present. The place was small, a second-floor unit with beige carpet and a kitchen that barely qualified as one, but it was mine. I set my keys on the counter, poured coffee into a chipped mug, and turned on the under-cabinet light. The yellow glow felt steady grounding. I opened my laptop but did not connect it to anything official. No networks, no portals, just a blank document and my own memory. I pulled a simple binder from the drawer, the kind anyone could buy at a grocery store. Inside were blank tabs and a stack of lined paper. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would look like a war room. This was not about theatrics. This was about order. I wrote the date at the top of the first page, and then I wrote one word: timeline. The first entries were easy. Phone calls from my father logged by date and time. Text messages I had saved without replying. Emails that arrived late at night, asking where I was and who I was with. I added gate entry logs pulled from automated. Notifications, my schedule showing when I was on duty and when I was not. I noted every time he showed up unexpectedly near my building, or called claiming to know where I was without me telling him. The pattern emerged quickly because it had always been there. I just had not lined it up this way before. As I wrote, I remembered something an instructor once told us during a dry briefing about investigations. Do not argue with chaos. Document it. Chaos hates paper. I smiled faintly at the memory and kept going. An hour passed, then two. The coffee went cold. I replaced it without thinking. My phone buzzed once and I ignored it. I was not ready for voices. I was ready for facts. When I reached the bottom of the page, I opened the drawer beneath the counter to grab another pen, and my hand brushed against something solid. I froze, then slowly pulled it out. It was a challenge, coin heavy and worn, its edges smoothed by years of being carried. I did not flip it over. I did not study it. I did not need to the weight. Alone was enough to remind me why silence had been necessary. I set it back into the drawer immediately and closed it as if someone might be watching, even though I was alone. That coin was not a trophy. It was a reminder of a line I could not cross unless absolutely necessary, and I was not there yet. I returned to the binder and kept writing. Every entry had a time, a place, and a source. No commentary, no conclusions, just facts. By the time the sky outside darkened, I had filled several pages, and something inside me felt steadier, not hopeful, not relieved, just anchored. I sat back and let my eyes rest on the list, and for the first time since the hallway, I did not feel hunted. I felt prepared. Comment paper trail if you have ever had to prove you were not the villain in your own family. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Chen. It was short, and it did not waste words. NCIS just received additional evidence from your father, she wrote. It directly references a classified compartment. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I reached for the binder and opened to a fresh page because I knew exactly what that meant. The paper trail had just become a battlefield. The next morning, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number, and when I answered, a calm male voice said, "NCIS Special Agent Moreno, we need you to come in today." He did not sound angry or suspicious. He sounded tired, like someone who had seen too many families turn into files. I drove to the office with my binder in my bag and my hands steady on the wheel. Even though my stomach kept tightening and releasing, like it could not decide whether to panic or focus. The waiting area smelled like paper and old carpet. A television played silent news captions in the corner. I sat with my back straight and watched a clock tick too loudly. When Moreno finally called my name, he led me down a hallway into an interview room, smaller than the one where my father spoke, but built from the same cold materials. Metal table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner, a folder placed neatly in front of him. He did not offer me coffee. He offered me honesty. "We received additional evidence from your father," he said, and slid the folder toward me. I did not reach for it yet. "What kind?" I asked. Moreno opened the folder and pulled out a printed page first, a screenshot, grainy and cropped the way people crop things, when they want you to see one part and ignore everything else. It showed a partial email header and a line of text that meant nothing without context. It looked like it was taken from a phone screen, then resized until the details blurred. Next, he placed a second page beside it, an email printout with my name in the sender field, and a subject line that sounded dramatic enough to scare anyone who did not understand process. It was formatted wrong, the spacing was off, the kind of mistake that happens when someone imitates something they do not truly know. Then he reached into the folder again and set a small plastic bag on the table. Inside was a USB drive with a piece of masking tape wrapped around it and handwriting in thick black marker, "Confession." It was almost absurd, and the absurdity made my jaw tighten because I knew what it was. Not evidence. It was theater. I looked at the items and then looked at Moreno without blinking. "Is any of this verified?" I asked. He held my gaze and did not answer directly. "Not yet," he said, "but we have to treat it seriously because of the terms it references." That was the part that mattered. I leaned forward slightly, not to plead, but to speak in the language that could not be dismissed. "Metadata," I said first. "Chain of custody. Origin access logs. I want all of it." I did not raise my voice. I did not call it a lie. I simply named what the system required. Moreno studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That is the right answer," he said, but his eyes stayed guarded because he was still inside the machine. I pointed at the screenshot. "This is cropped." I said, "I want the full source file with timestamps and device information." I tapped the email printout. "This formatting is inconsistent with official routing." I said, "I want the original message in the server logs, not a printout." I glanced. "At the USB, I want chain of custody," I said. "Who handled it? Where was it stored? Who accessed it? And what are the hashes before and after review?" Moreno exhaled through his nose as if I had just confirmed something he suspected about me and about my father. "You understand this process?" He said, "I do," I replied, because I had survived my father by learning processes before I ever joined the Navy. Moreno gathered the papers back into the folder, but left the USB on the table for one extra second. Like he wanted me to look at it longer. I did, and I saw what my father wanted everyone to see: a dramatic label, a simple story, a villain created with a marker. I heard my father's voice in my head. "You are unstable and secretive," and I felt the old instinct to go quiet and disappear. I did not let it win. Moreno stood and opened the door. "We will follow up once we run checks," he said, and then he added softly, "Off the record, he is pushing hard." That sentence was the closest thing to a warning he could give without Crossing a line, I left the office, and as soon as I sat in my car, my phone buzzed with a message from my father. It arrived like it had been waiting for me to walk out. "Come home," he wrote. "We will handle this like family. Do not force me to escalate." The words were soft on the screen, but I could feel the pressure behind them, the familiar trap. Come home meant step back into my chains. Handle this like family meant let him rewrite the narrative. Escalate meant he had more levers left. I stared at the message until my eyes burned. Then I set the phone face down and drove away from everything he wanted. I did not go home to him. I went home to my apartment and to my binder, and to the only thing that had ever protected me. Proof. I opened the binder and wrote his message down with the time and date. Then I saved the screenshot in a folder on my laptop labeled Frank Texts. I did not reply. I did not argue. I documented. 2 hours later, Chen called me from a restricted number. Her voice was low and careful. "Harper, he is telling people you are emotional," she said. "He is saying you have been acting irrational and that the Navy needs protection from you. He is using your silence as a symptom." I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my tone even. "What do I do?" I asked. "The same thing you have been doing," Chen replied. "You use the channels built for this. You request a military protective order through Command and JAG. You do not make it bigger than it needs to be. You make it formal." I closed my eyes briefly and then opened them again. I understood the difference between emotion and action. My father wanted emotion because emotion would be used as proof. Action would be used as defense. I followed the steps Chen gave me. I submitted the request through the proper route with factual statements and attachments. His message time-stamped, his history summarized cleanly. No accusations I could not support. No dramatic language, just the plain truth of coercion and intimidation. When I finished, I sat in my kitchen under the cabinet light and waited for the familiar aftershock, the guilt, the fear, the urge to undo it. But none of that came. Only a tight focus that felt like stepping onto solid ground. Later that evening, Moreno called me back and his voice sounded different, sharper but controlled. "We are still reviewing," he said, "but I need you to know something." He paused like he was choosing how to say it. "One line in the material your father provided contains terminology that is not commonly known, unless someone has been formally read in." My fingers tightened around the phone. Moreno continued. "I noticed it because I have seen it before, and because it does not belong in his hands." He stopped talking for a beat, and in that silence, I understood what he could not say out loud. My father was holding something he should not be holding, and he had brought it into a room to make me look guilty. The injustice did not just escalate. It sharpened into something dangerous and immediate. Before I could respond, another call came. Through on my line, an internal number I did not recognize. I answered, and a voice I had never heard said, "Special Warfare Liaison needs your location now." I was moved to a different waiting room without ceremony or explanation. No raised voices, no orders, barked just a quiet instruction to follow, and a door that closed behind me with a softer click than the ones before. The room was smaller than the others, and felt intentionally unfinished, like it existed between decisions. A single table, 2 chairs, a water cooler humming in the corner, and a clock without numbers. I sat with my hands folded and listened to my own breathing until the sound settled into something steady. Minutes passed. Then more. I did not know how many because the clock refused to help. Then Chen stepped in alone and closed the door behind her. She did not sit. She leaned slightly against the wall and spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "There are channels above this room," she said. The sentence was casual, almost careless, but it landed with weight. She did not elaborate, and I did not ask, because asking would have been noise, and noise would have been a mistake. I nodded once and watched her leave. When the door closed again, I felt something unfamiliar cut through the tension, a thin thread of hope, not the loud kind that promises rescue, but the quiet kind that reminds you there are layers you cannot see. I thought about the word designation and how it never appears in public bios or casual conversations. It lives in margins and briefings and quiet acknowledgments passed between people who know when to stop talking. My own record would not tell that story to anyone looking at it from the outside. It would look ordinary support role operations support the same words I had always used because they were true and because they hid the rest. I remembered my first long night on watch when the room smelled like stale coffee and electronics, and everyone was tired enough to miss patterns hiding in plain sight. I had been new, quiet, and observant, assigned to coordinate inputs that arrived out of order feeds, that did not agree timestamps that drifted. I did not raise my voice or interrupt. I wrote everything down and built a timeline because timelines do not care about ego. At some point, the numbers stopped lining up in a way that made sense, and I saw a discrepancy that suggested a misidentification. I flagged it carefully, not as an accusation, but as a question. If this is correct, then that cannot be. And the decision stalled just long enough for someone senior to look again. The room went quiet, then focused, and the correction came in time. Nobody applauded. Nobody said my name out loud, they just moved on, and later someone tapped the table near me and said, "Good catch," and that was it. The next night was longer. We rotated through data that arrived fractured and late, and I stayed because leaving would have meant handing off half-built understanding. I learned to live inside ambiguity, to hold competing possibilities without panic, and to choose restraint over speed. When a potential ambush was avoided weeks later, nobody connected it back to a support decision made at 3 in the morning, but I did because I had seen the chain form link by link. I learned that coordination was not passive, and that saving lives often looked like refusing to let momentum make the call. Another memory surfaced of a briefing where a senior officer spoke without notes and said something that stayed with me. If anyone tries to bury you, do not speak, signal the right channel. He did not look at me when he said it, but I felt it land like a personal instruction. I had carried that sentence with me ever since, repeating it silently, whenever my father pressed, or when someone mistook my quiet for absence. Those experiences were the reason my file would never look impressive to someone skimming it, and the reason it mattered to people who understood what it actually represented. The designation tied to my work was not a rank or a title that could be bragged about. It was a responsibility activated when conditions aligned, and only then. Until that moment, you looked like everyone else, and that was by design. The waiting room door opened, and a staffer slid a paper cup of water onto the table without meeting my eyes, then left again. I drank slowly and kept my posture neutral. I could feel the pull to explain myself, to justify to list achievements, but I resisted because explanation would cheapen what could only be proven by process and timing. That was the discipline I had learned the hard way. The tension in my chest eased a fraction, not because the danger had passed, but because I recognized the terrain again. This was a place where silence had purpose and patience had teeth. If you want the truth to speak louder than your family story hit, like I said it quietly to myself, like a reminder, not a plea. Footsteps approached from down the hall faster than before, purposeful but not hurried. I stood without being told because my body recognized the rhythm. The door opened and a small group entered together. No shouting, no dramatic entrance. Yet the air in the room changed immediately, as if an invisible switch had been thrown. Conversations outside the room stopped. The hum of the cooler felt louder by contrast, and then seemed to fade as everyone present oriented toward the same unspoken center. The group did not announce who they were, and did not need to. The room fell silent on its own, and I knew without being told that whatever came next would not be explained here. The group entered without noise, no doors slammed, no commands shouted yet. The effect was immediate. Conversations outside the room stopped mid-sentence. Chairs shifted as if pulled by the same string, and the air itself seemed to straighten. One of them stepped forward and spoke in a tone that did not invite response. "This interview is paused." The words were simple, but they carried weight because they were not a request. Another voice followed, calm, measured. "We are assuming control of the environment." No one argued, no one asked why the system recognized itself in them and yielded. CMDR Klein stood halfway from his chair, confusion crossing his face. "This is an internal matter," he began, and then stopped, because one of the newcomers had already turned the camera in the corner off with a practiced motion. The red light disappeared, and with it, the sense that this room belonged to the same rules as before. I remained still, hands at my sides, eyes forward because instinct told me movement was unnecessary. Now one of the men approached me not aggressively, not gently but with precision. He did not ask my name. He asked a question that sounded ordinary to anyone listening, but was not. "Confirm last operational window," he said. I answered without hesitation and without explanation. He nodded once. Another stepped closer and spoke a short phrase, a code that meant nothing outside the narrow lane of people trained to hear it. I replied with the matching response because there was only one correct answer, and I had lived with it long enough to know it would surface when needed. The third checked my identification quickly. Not my CAC, which was gone, but another confirmation protocol handled quietly between them. No secrets were spoken aloud. No details were shared. Yet something fundamental shifted, because the process had just validated me without spectacle. CMDR Klein looked from them to me and back again. His authority had not been revoked, but it had been eclipsed. He cleared his throat. "Who exactly are you?" he asked, and the man nearest him did not answer. Instead, he turned to me, and in that moment the room focused as if the walls were listening. He straightened and brought his hand up in a crisp salute. "Sir, command is yours." The word "sir" landed like a gavel. In my world, "sir" was not gender. It was authority. I did not return the salute immediately because returning it would have been unnecessary, and because restraint was part of the language. I simply inclined my head a fraction and said nothing. That silence spoke louder than any title. My father stood frozen near the far wall, his mouth slightly open, his hands hanging at his sides. He did not raise his voice. He did not protest. He did not even ask what was happening because confusion had stolen his script. For the first time in my life, I watched him without fear as he searched for a rule that applied and found none. The room had been secured, and the system had changed direction without him. CMDR Klein looked unsettled now. He glanced at my father, then back. At the liaison, I was not read in. He said slowly, as if saying it aloud might fix the problem. The response was immediate and final. "Read in required." The phrase closed the door on his involvement without insulting him and without explanation. It was not personal. It was procedural. My father shifted his weight as if he might speak, then stopped. His power had always depended on being the loudest voice in the room or the one with the most confidence. Tonight, he was neither. The liaison gestured subtly, and another member of the group positioned himself between my father and the table, not threatening, just present. The message was clear. The stage was no longer available to him. I remained where I was, eyes level, posture calm, because there was nothing to prove. This was not a victory lap. It was a transfer of control. The liaison turned back to CMDR Klein. "This matter is now under a different review track," he said. "You will receive guidance through proper channels." Klein nodded stiffly. The room that had once felt hostile now felt neutral, emptied of its earlier judgment. The injustice had not vanished, but it had been interrupted, and interruption was sometimes enough. I glanced once at my father and saw something unfamiliar flicker across his face. Not anger, not disappointment, but uncertainty. He had pulled a lever expecting the machine to crush me, and instead the machine had rerouted around him. He did not understand what he had triggered, and that ignorance was the first real crack. The liaison spoke again, softer, now directed at me. "We will need your location confirmed for continuity," he said. I gave it, and nothing more. The exchange was efficient, complete, and deliberately uninformative to anyone listening. CMDR Klein rubbed his forehead and asked the question everyone else was thinking. "Who is she?" The liaison did not look at me when he answered. "Read in required." The words hung in the air long after the group began to move again, resetting the space without ceremony. As they guided the process forward, I felt the shift settle fully into place. The power reversal had begun, not with force or anger, but with procedure and silence. And for the first time since my father spoke the word treason, I knew the system had finally stopped mistaking him for me. The file moved channels the way a river changes course without announcing itself. One minute, my name sat under a stalled administrative review, and the next, it was routed into an inspector general and command review track, with a different cadence and a different set of eyes. My access returned in pieces, not everything. Not all at once, just what was necessary to function and to document. And that was enough. Chen explained it plainly on the phone. "We are not arguing anymore," she said. "We are building a record that cannot be ignored." I understood the shift immediately. Survival had been the first objective, and that door was now open. The second objective was prevention. Because if my father could do this to me, he would do it again to someone else. And next time the target might not know how to hold a line. I decided then that leaving quietly was not an option. Closing the door mattered, Harper. You do not owe anyone a crusade. Chen cautioned. I know I said and I meant it. This was not about vengeance, dressed as justice. It was about stopping a pattern with the only tool that worked: documentation that forced consequences. We named the conduct exactly as it was: misuse of official reporting channels, false statements, witness coaching, retaliation through institutional process. The language mattered because it stripped emotion from the acts and placed them where they belonged, inside rules. My father claimed to respect. We built the packet together methodically without drama. A clean timeline anchored by dates and times. The text messages he sent urging me to come home and warning me not to force escalation, voicemails, where his tone shifted between concern and pressure. Camera doorbell clips showing him approaching my building after I stopped responding. Entry logs that placed him near spaces he claimed he never visited. Screenshots of messages he sent to acquaintances asking them to share his version of events, and a short list of outreach attempts where he tried to shop the story to a veteran organization, and a small local blog framing himself as a patriotic parent forced to act. The binder grew thicker, not heavy with opinion, but dense with fact. Each tab corresponded to a claim. Each claim matched to evidence. Each piece of evidence cross-referenced. I watched the pattern emerge again, this time undeniable. My father had coached language. He had rehearsed lines. He had positioned witnesses by priming them with concern and urgency. He had used the system as leverage, not protection. Chen reviewed the draft and nodded. "This is how you do it," she said. "You let the record speak. When it came time to submit, we did it through the proper lanes, no shortcuts, no leaks, no spectacle." The packet went to IG and command review with a cover memo that stated the request and nothing more. We did not ask for punishment. We asked for findings. I felt the weight lift slightly after it left my hands. Not relief, but clarity. The response came sooner than I expected, not with details, but with permission to proceed, and then a single line appeared in my inbox from an address that carried authority without advertising it. "Proceed, we will back you." I did not reply. I did not forward it. I did not save it anywhere obvious. I closed the message and returned to the binder because the backing was not the point. The process was. The days that followed were quiet, in the way storms sometimes are before they decide where to break. I returned to duty in a limited capacity and did my work the same way I always had: precise and contained. The difference was internal. I no longer felt like I was hiding. I felt like I was holding a boundary, and there is a difference, even when the posture looks identical. Chen checked in once to say the review was moving and to remind me to document any further contact I did not hear from my father directly. But the silence did not feel like retreat. It felt like repositioning. Then the rumor reached me through a side channel, a friend of a friend who attended a meeting out of curiosity. There was talk. My father was telling his story again, this time in person at a veterans hall near Norfolk. The phrase traitor daughter was used as a hook. He spoke about duty and sacrifice and how sometimes family members lose their way and must be stopped for the greater good. He framed himself as calm and reasonable, and me as unstable and secretive. The same words he always used because they had always worked. The escalation was predictable, and that predictability steadied me. I added the report to the binder date time location. Names of attendees where no commentary. I did not go to the meeting. I did not post a response. I did not warn anyone because the record already existed and the record was moving. The difference now was that my father was speaking into a space that would no longer shield him from consequences. Chen called later that night. He is digging in. She said, I know I replied and meant something different than before. This time, digging in meant digging down comment line, if you believe. Boundaries are protection, not betrayal. I said it out loud once to the empty room, not as a call for support, but as a reminder of why I was doing this. The mini hook settled heavy and clear. My father was not finished, and neither was the process, because the story he was telling near Norfolk was about to meet a system that no longer mistook volume for truth. I learned about the live stream, the way bad news spreads in military communities, quietly at first, then everywhere at once. Someone texted me a screenshot of a familiar face under fluorescent lights, a VFW hall near Norfolk with folding chairs, a plastic podium, and an American flag behind him, like a prop he had earned the right to use. My father's name was on the flyer as a guest speaker, and the caption on the local Facebook page read something about duty, family, and hard decisions. The comments were already filling up with heart emojis and thanks for your service, and the kind of automatic respect people give older men who speak with certainty. I did not click the video at first because I could already hear his voice in my head. But later that night, I opened it with my volume low and watched just enough to confirm what I feared. He stood there in front of a room of strangers and spoke as if he was delivering a public service announcement. My daughter has been involved in things she should not be involved in, he said, then paused like he was waiting for sympathy. I did what I had to do. The word patriotism appeared every few sentences, like a shield. He framed coercion as responsibility and control as love. He did not describe my work because he did not know it. He described my silence and called it suspicious. He described my boundaries and called them disrespect. He described my refusal to come home and called it evidence of instability. I watched the room nod along, watched people clap when he used words like traitor and safety and protecting the Navy from her. The cruelty was not loud. It was smooth, polished, and socially acceptable. And that made it worse because it fit inside what people wanted to believe. A father protecting his country from his own child. The live stream ended with more applause, and my father's satisfied smile, the one he wore when he believed he had won the room. I closed the video without commenting, without sharing, without reacting, because fighting him there would have given him what he wanted, a public argument where he could point at my emotion and call it proof. I sent the link to Chen with one line. He is escalating through public narrative. She responded with another line. I expected, we stay procedural. The next morning, she sent a notice to the veteran organization and to the event page using language that sounded cold because it had to ongoing investigation. False statements may carry consequences. The notice did not accuse. It warned, it placed a boundary around his performance without engaging it. Some people in the comments got angry at the message. Others suddenly went quiet. The shift was small but visible, and it was enough to remind me that institutions do not have to shout to create pressure. They only have to document. Meanwhile, my command calendar did what calendars always do. It moved forward regardless of personal collapse. An all-hands event was scheduled on base. A combined awards and climate brief with families invited a normal military gathering. Normal. In a large auditorium, rows of seats, a stage with flags, a podium, and the hum of conversations that sounded harmless until you knew what could happen in that room. Chen called me the day before. "You will be there," she said, not as a question. "They will address the climate items related to reporting channels and conduct. You need to be present." I felt my stomach tighten again. Not fear exactly, but the awareness that public spaces are where control tries to reassert itself. And my father loved public spaces because they gave him witnesses. I arrived early on the day of the event and sat near the aisle, not hiding, but positioned to leave if necessary. The auditorium filled with uniforms and civilian clothes, spouses, children, grandparents, retirees, family photos were being taken in the lobby. The smell of coffee and cheap pastries drifted through the air. The stage lights were bright and steady, and the flag stood perfectly still. I kept my face neutral and my hands folded, and I did not scan for him because I did not want to give my body away. Then I saw him anyway. He walked in like he belonged there, wearing a blazer and the expression of a man who believed his narrative granted him access. He moved toward the front rows where VIP seating began. And no one stopped him at first because he looked like a patriotic father, and people are conditioned to let men like that pass. He sat down in the front row near the center, leaning back comfortably as if he had bought a ticket to my downfall. The injustice hit hard because he did not have permission to be there, and yet he was there breathing the same air as my coworkers and their families, using the space to stage himself as the concerned parent. Again, I did not move. I did not approach him. I did not whisper to anyone. I watched the clock on the wall and waited for the system to do what it was designed to do. Because now the system had my packet and his pattern and the notice Chen had sent and the live stream footage and the documented escalation. The event began with routine announcements, awards, names called applause, children waving from seats. Then the climate portion started, and the atmosphere shifted slightly the way it does when a room senses seriousness. The master of ceremonies stepped back to the podium and adjusted the microphone. His voice carried cleanly across the room. "Before we continue," he said, "we will address an abusive process." My father's posture changed instantly. He leaned forward as if proud, as if this was the moment someone would confirm what he had been telling strangers about me. I could almost see him thinking, "Finally, they will say it out loud. Finally, they will validate me." He sat there in the front row ready to watch my name be dragged again, and he had no idea the sentence he was waiting for was not aimed at me at all. The master of ceremonies stepped slightly aside, and an officer I recognized from JAG walked to the podium with a thin folder in hand. The room did not erupt into drama. It simply quieted the way it always does when uniforms sense official business. The officer introduced himself with minimal formality and stated that a command-level finding briefing would be delivered regarding misuse of reporting channels and retaliatory conduct. He did not say my name first, and that alone felt like a reversal because my father had built his entire performance on making me the headline. The officer began with the rule, not the people. Reporting systems exist to protect national security and personnel integrity. He said, they are not instruments for personal control, retaliation, or coercion. The words landed cleanly, and I saw my father stiffen in the front row, as if he suddenly realized the spotlight was not where he expected. The officer continued, "An internal review has been conducted with coordination between the Inspector General and Judge Advocate Element's findings are presented at the level permitted by policy." He paused, then read the first conclusion. A report was submitted containing false statements and material inconsistencies, including indications of altered or selectively edited content. The room stayed quiet, but I felt a ripple move through the audience like air-changing pressure. My father turned his head slightly, as if looking for someone to confirm he heard that wrong. The officer went on. The report included content referencing terminology that the reporting individual was not authorized to possess and could not credibly contextualize. The phrasing was careful, but the implication was clear. He had reached for words beyond his reach to make his story sound real, and that overreach had exposed him. Next conclusion. The reporting individual engaged in retaliatory communication and conduct toward the member, including implied threats and attempts to compel contact outside official channels. My father shifted again, shoulders tightening, and for the first time, he did not look proud. He looked trapped. The officer turned a page and delivered the line I had been waiting for without knowing it would feel this sharp. The conduct observed aligns with coercive control and constitutes an abuse of reporting channels. A few people inhaled audibly because the phrase coercive control is not the language of casual disagreement. It is the language of patterns and harm, and it named my father in a way he could not charm his way out of. The officer continued. Appropriate referrals are being made. This includes advisement for a military protective order request, where applicable, and referral for review of potential false reporting through appropriate investigative channels. In addition, the reporting individual is to have no contact with the member through command-facilitated settings without prior authorization. I watched the front row and saw my father begin to rise, not fully, but enough that his knee bumped the seat in front of him as if his body tried to lunge into the narrative again. He opened his mouth and no sound came out at first, because the room had turned against him with nothing but procedure. Then he found his voice. "This is ridiculous," he said too loud. "This is my daughter. I am trying to protect the Navy." The words sounded thin now because the official language had already framed him as the threat, not the protector. An usher or security detail stepped close, not grabbing him, not shoving him, simply present, and the master of ceremonies spoke into the microphone. "Sir, you will remain seated or you will be escorted out." My father froze halfway between standing and sitting. The humiliation was not in being yelled at. It was in being managed, like a disruption in front of a community. He had tried to control. I stayed still. I did not smile. I did not react, because this was not about my emotions. It was about the truth, entering the room and taking the air away from his performance, the JAG. Officer finished with a brief statement that the member would return to duties under proper oversight, and that allegations against the member were not sustained. There was no applause, because this was not a victory celebration. It was an administrative correction. Yet I heard murmurs from families and sailors and retirees who now understood they had been asked to believe a story built on power rather than evidence. The officer stepped back, and the master of ceremonies looked toward me briefly, then nodded a signal that I could speak if I chose to. My mouth felt dry, but my posture remained steady. I walked to the podium without rushing and looked out at faces that had become witnesses. Not to my failure, but to my father's exposure. I kept my statement short, because anything longer would have been a speech, and speeches invite debate. I served quietly, I said. My family used my silence as a weapon against me. This stops today. I paused, then added one more sentence for clarity. I will not allow official systems to be used as tools of control against anyone in this command again. Then I stepped back. My father sat rigid, eyes forward, jaw clenched, and I could see him trying to calculate a countermove, but there was none that fit inside the rules without deepening his own consequences. Drop justice. If you have ever watched a bully collapse the moment the truth entered the room, I thought the line as I returned to my seat, because the collapse was real and it was happening without fireworks, just with the slow certainty of accountability. When the event ended, people filed out in small groups talking quietly, not about my father with anger, but with a kind of stunned recognition that these things happen behind closed doors more often than anyone admits. I stayed near the aisle again, letting the crowd thin so I would not be forced into conversations I did not want. My father waited until the hallway cleared, then approached alone, not with his earlier swagger, but with a tight, controlled urgency. "Harper," he said, using my name like a lever. "Listen." He glanced around as if checking who might hear. "We can fix this. You just need to say one sentence. Tell them you overreacted. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Say it, and I can salvage my name." The request was his last door, his last escape. And I realized as he stood there that the next battle would not be in a room full of witnesses. It would be in the quiet where he tried to make me responsible for saving him from the consequences of his own actions. I did not give my father the sentence he wanted. I did not argue with him either. I let his request hang in the air for a moment, and then I turned and walked away. Because the briefing had already said what needed to be said, and anything I added would only reopen the door he was desperate to crawl through. The consequences began quietly, then stacked like weights. Frank was barred from base access, and it happened with the kind of administrative simplicity that feels brutal to people who have lived on privilege: a gate database update, a name flagged, a credential denied. He tried to present himself at the visitor center and was told calmly that he was not authorized and that further attempts would be documented. He tried to call the command line the same way he had tried to call my life into compliance, and the channels went cold. He was cut off from contact routes he once believed were his by birthright. The veteran organization that hosted his talk posted a vague follow-up statement about maintaining integrity and not platforming ongoing disputes involving official investigations. His friends began to go quiet, not because they suddenly cared about me, but because no one wants their own reputation contaminated by a man labeled for abuse of reporting channels. One by one, the people who had applauded his speech stopped taking his calls. I heard this not from gossip, but from the same method I used for everything. Now documentation. Someone sent me screenshots of posts, deleted invitations rescinded, and messages left on read. He had used patriotism as cover, and now the cover was burning away. Meanwhile, I received formal notice that my father's statements were being reviewed under the appropriate investigative lane for false statements and harassment. The phrasing was careful, but the meaning was clear. The system had shifted from listening to him to examining him. He had wanted power through procedure, and procedure had finally looked back at him. I expected to feel satisfaction, but what I felt instead was a strange lightness, like I had been carrying a heavy bag for years, and only now realized I could set it down. That lightness did not erase grief. I still had a father and a childhood and a lifetime of trying to earn peace from someone who only traded control. But the air in my chest was no longer compressed by fear. I still woke at odd hours expecting my phone to buzz with a new crisis, a new accusation, a new pressure point. Yet the buzz did not come, and the silence began to feel like safety rather than suspense. Chen checked in and confirmed the protective boundary remained in place, and reminded me not to engage any attempts at contact. Outside approved channels, I told her I understood and meant it, because I could finally see that my impulse to explain had been part of the trap. If I explained, he could argue. If I argued, he could twist. If he twisted, he could claim emotional instability and loop the story again. So I did not explain. I did not argue. I breathed and returned to the pieces of my life that had never belonged to him. My command recommended counseling, and I accepted, because I was tired of pretending discipline alone could heal what coercion had done. I went to chaplain services on a weekday afternoon, and the office smelled like tea and clean carpet. The waiting room was small, a few chairs, a side table with pamphlets about stress and transition and family boundaries. A kettle clicked softly somewhere behind a door. I sat with my hands on my knees and watched the steam curl from a paper cup like a slow signal that time was moving forward, even if my mind wanted to stay in the briefing room forever. The counselor asked me one question and did not rush to fill the space. When did you first feel controlled? The simplicity of it hit harder than any accusation because it framed my life in a single line. I stared at the floor for a moment, and then I answered honestly. Not when I joined the Navy, not when my father threatened to make one call, not even when he reported me for treason. The first time I felt controlled was when I was a teenager, and I realized permission in my house did not mean safety. It meant compliance. Saying it out loud made my throat tighten and my eyes sting in a way I refused to perform in uniform. But the counselor did not react like my father would have. She just nodded and let the truth exist without punishment. That was new. The sessions did not turn me into someone else. They simply returned me to myself in small increments. I learned how to name patterns without shame, how to separate duty from obligation, how to recognize that love that demands erasure is not love. At the end of one session, my phone rang, and the caller ID displayed a number I recognized as high level. I stepped into the hallway to answer. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and brief. "You are returning to duty, same mission. No praise, no details, just back to purpose." I acknowledged the instruction and ended the call and felt something settle into place, not triumph, but alignment. The work I had done quietly would continue, and my family story would no longer be allowed to drown it. As the week closed, I drove home in the late afternoon light and noticed I was no longer scanning every parking lot for my father's car. The habit was still there, but fading like a bruise, finally healing. I parked outside my building and sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, listening to my own breathing and the soft tick of the engine cooling. I thought about the word command and how it had always been used against me in my father's mouth, and how it had finally been used properly in that room. "Sir, command is yours, authority, not gender control, not cruelty." The day felt heavy and also finished, and I believed for a few minutes that the worst was behind me. Then, as I stepped out of the car, I saw him at the edge of the lot near the sidewalk, not storming, not performing, just standing with his shoulders rounded, as if the world had finally gotten heavier than his. Ego. His voice when he spoke was smaller. "Harper," he said, not loud enough for anyone else to hear. "We need to talk." He did not step closer at first, which told me he had already learned something from the last time power left his hands. His voice carried a softness I had never trusted, because it always arrived before a demand. "Harper," he said again, this time like a plea. "They are ruining me." He gestured vaguely toward the street, the base, the city, the invisible system he used to command with a raised eyebrow. "You do not understand what this does to my legacy." The word legacy landed where guilt used to live, and for a second, I felt the old reflex twitch the urge to smooth it over to make it easier for him to breathe. But the reflex passed and left clarity in its place. He took a step forward, then another, and lowered his voice as if we were conspirators. "Just tell them you overreacted," he said. "Say you were stressed. Say you misunderstood me. One sentence and this all goes away." I watched his face as he spoke and noticed how the performance had changed. He was not angry yet. He was bargaining the way he always did. When the threat of consequences first became real, I did not raise my voice. I did not move closer. I said 3 sentences and stopped. "You use the system to control me. I will not rewrite the truth to save your pride. If you want a relationship, start with accountability." The words felt solid because they were not new. I had practiced them in quieter rooms, and they held even here in the open air, with witnesses passing by and engines idling. He blinked. Then the softness fell away like a dropped mask. His jaw tightened and his tone sharpened as if he could still flip a switch and return me to compliance. "After everything I did for you," he said, his voice rising, "I put a roof over your head. I taught you discipline. I made you who you are. And this is how you repay me, by letting strangers judge me." He stepped closer now, and I felt the line inside my chest lock into place. I did not step back. He tried a different angle, his voice slipping into wounded righteousness. "You are letting them use you." He said, "They want to make an example and you are helping them. Do you know what people are saying about me?" He laughed once, short and bitter. "They think I am some kind of monster. You could fix this. You owe me that." The escalation was clear. Now blame, accusation, entitlement dressed up as pain. The old me would have explained why he was wrong. The present me understood that explanation would be permission. I looked at him and kept my voice even. "This conversation is over. I said I have asked you not to contact me." He scoffed and waved a hand. "You think some piece of paper scares me?" He leaned in closer and his words pressed hard. "You are still my daughter. I can still talk to you whenever I want." That sentence broke the last thin thread of pretense. It was the same sentence, in a different outfit. The same belief that my boundaries were optional and my autonomy temporary. I did not argue. I did not threaten. I took out my phone and called the number I had saved under one-word duty. When the dispatcher answered, I said my name, my location, and one sentence. "My father is violating the conditions by contacting me in person. I need assistance." I kept my eyes on him as I spoke and watched the color drain from his face. Because now the room he was standing in was not one he controlled. He tried to interrupt, to explain, to charm, to shout. I turned my body slightly away from him and ended the call, and that was enough. He backed up a step, then another, his hands opening and closing, as if he was deciding whether to keep pushing or retreat. The choice was taken from him when a patrol vehicle turned into the lot, lights not flashing, but present, unmistakable. He changed again instantly, the victim posture snapping into place. "You see what you are doing to me?" he said louder now for anyone nearby to hear. "You are calling the police on your own father. This is abuse." His words bounced off the air and fell flat because no one reacted the way he expected. The officers approached, calmly asked for names, and listened, while I stated the facts without commentary, without history, without adjectives. The simplicity mattered. It always did, when they informed him that the contact was a violation and that further action would be documented. He tried to argue, then tried to joke, then tried to plead. None of it worked. He was instructed to leave and warned clearly about next steps. His shoulders slumped as if the ground had finally tilted against him. As he walked away, he turned once and said, "This is not over." The sentence sounded smaller than he intended, and for the first time I believed him in a different way. It was not over because he would not let it be over. The system would. After the vehicle left, I stood in the quiet and felt my pulse slow. The night air smelled like asphalt and salt and something like relief. I knew what would come next because patterns do not stop when confronted. They intensify before they collapse. He had crossed the line again, and the line had teeth. I drove home and documented the encounter time, location, statements, and response because that was how safety was built now, not with hope, but with records. The next morning, the notice arrived confirming the violation and outlining administrative consequences that would follow if he attempted contact again. There was nothing dramatic about it, and that was the point. Power had moved from performance to process, and he could not outtalk a process that no longer cared about his story. I did not celebrate. I made coffee and stood at the window and watched the city wake up and felt the steady return of myself. If you are watching this and wondering what you would do, help the person who tried to erase you or protect your peace. Comment one word. I knew the answer because I was living it, and because even as I set my phone down, another alert appeared confirming that my father had been formally warned and restricted again, and that any further attempt would trigger escalation through legal channels. The bridge he kept trying to cross was gone, and the river beneath it was rising. 3 months later, in September 2025, my life looked ordinary again in the ways that mattered. I had moved into a smaller place closer to the water, a clean apartment with light in the mornings, and a quiet balcony that faced the river. I did not call it a fresh start. Like it was a slogan, I just called it mine. The locks were new. The routines were mine. The silence did not feel like punishment anymore. It felt like space. I built simple habits that grounded me: a walk before dawn, coffee at the same cafe where the barista stopped asking my name because she already knew it, and 1 hour every Sunday evening where I organized my week, the way I had learned to organize everything else, with calm order and no apology. My father did not disappear, but his access did. He remained restricted from contact, and every attempt he made after the violation carried consequences that were not mine to manage. Some old family friends stopped reaching out. Others sent careful messages, like they did not know what to say. I did not chase them. I did not explain I had spent a lifetime trying to win people to my reality. And I was done performing my pain for approval. The command returned me to duty in full, and the work resumed with the same quiet intensity as before. I did not talk about it, and no one asked, because people who understand security understand silence. In late September, I received a calendar note from a secure channel, brief time window location to be announced, arrival instructions included. The message was simple, and it carried weight because it came without embellishment. I showed up at the designated building on a gray morning, with my hair pulled back and my posture steady. The entrance was unmarked from the street, just another government facade, but inside the air felt different, controlled, quieter, like the building itself was holding its breath. I checked in and followed the escort through a corridor that turned twice, then ended at a door with a reader I had never been authorized to use publicly. Before the escort did not explain, he did not need to. He paused at the threshold and said softly, "This way, Mom." My badge flashed green, and the door opened, and I stepped into a space most people would never see. A conference room with minimal furniture screens, dark for the moment, chairs arranged with precision. A few people in civilian attire stood near the far wall, not talking much, just waiting. The atmosphere was not celebratory. It was focused, the kind of focus that belongs to people who carry responsibilities no one thanks them for. Then a senior leader entered, not surrounded by theatrics, just presence. He looked at me as if the room had been holding a place for me the whole time. "We have been waiting for you, Harper," he said. The sentence was not praise. It was confirmation. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the one that comes when you realize you are standing at the edge of something larger than your personal story. He nodded toward a seat at the head of the table, and for a second the memory of my father's voice tried to intrude. "I can still control you," but it could not reach me here. This room did not belong to him, and neither did I. A folder was placed in front of me, and I did not open it yet, because protocol is not about curiosity, it is about restraint. The leader spoke in careful terms, acknowledging my return to the same mission and the same cell, and the same designation that had never existed in my father's understanding of me. My public record would remain unremarkable by design, support, role by appearance, silence by necessity. Yet within this compartment, my designation was real and operational. And when it mattered, the room moved around it not out of ego, but out of structure. Because in certain cells, authority is assigned to function, not flash. And my function was the kind that kept people alive without ever being seen. No one in that room called me a hero. No one said inspirational. They simply treated me as what I was, a professional trusted with a role that required both competence and control of self. That was the real power my father never understood. He believed power was volume and intimidation and ownership. Power was walking into a secure space and being recognized without needing to explain who you were. I thought about the command event the moment he tried to rise and was told to sit, and how the humiliation had not been violence. It had been the loss of a stage. Now I sat down, and the room oriented around the work, not my identity, not my family, not my past. The leader spoke briefly about the last quarter and the next set of tasks, and then he ended with a quiet recognition that was not a ceremony, just a statement of fact. "Your handling of misuse of process and retaliatory pressure was exemplary." He said, "You protected the integrity of the system, and you protected yourself. You did not weaponize your position. You used it correctly. That was all, and it was enough, because recognition like that does not need applause to be real." When I left the building later, the sky had brightened slightly, and the river wind felt cold and clean against my face. I walked to my car and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel, breathing in the quiet, and letting the truth settle deeper than any revenge fantasy ever could. My father had tried to erase me through procedure, and I had responded with the only power worth having: self-governance. The moral I carried now was simple, and it was for anyone who has lived long enough to know: family can be the first place you learn fear. Real power is autonomy, not winning arguments. Justice is not humiliation, it is prevention. It is making sure the person who abused you cannot do it again. Through the same channels, I turned on my phone and saw a message from Chen. Another case, different family. Same pattern. I stared at it for a second, then typed back one word: understood. If this story hit a nerve, subscribe. We tell the truth. Families try to bury.